the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we are visiting Heather Roan Robbins in Ronan, Montana. Hello, welcome to the show, Heather.
Hello. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I remember visiting you on one of my cross-country treks, and I absolutely adore where you live in this country.
I'm so glad to have you here. It was funny because I could not prove to you that we were surrounded by mountains. It was overcast the whole time you were here. I kept saying, no, really, there's huge mountains right behind that cloud, but someday you'll see them for real.
Exactly. It begs another trip. So let's just get right down into it.
Yes.
What was your first astrology book?
My first astrology book is and I have a beaten up old copy here, the A-Z Horoscope Delineator by Llewellyn George. Now, I started studying astrology when I was 14, when the niece of Carol Reiter, a famous astrologer, worked for Reagan, unfortunately, but his niece was a telephone operator at my school back when they had those things back in 1969, 1970. And I saw that she was a better counselor than the school psychologist when she had her books. When she didn't have her books, she was just a nice lady. And I saw her say to two people, could you just be a little careful this weekend? The teachers, because she had everybody's chart. And I'm working for her at the switchboard so I can pump her for all the information she can get. I'd already studied astrology for several years already, starting at 11. So when I saw her tell two teachers, just be a little careful. And one was an elderly man who died on stage. He was the drama teacher. He had a heart attack. And the other one was a nice young man who fell down some stairs.
That weekend? Both of them?
That weekend, both of them.
Wow.
So I said, tell me more. And I just kept pumping her for information. She said, so where do I start? And she sent me to New York City to a bookstore on the second floor that you had to knock 3 times. There was no sign on the door, little old occult bookstore, nothing in it but a very interesting squirrely man with huge eyes and 3 rooms of books. And I bought my A-Z Horoscope Delineator there and took that and an ephemeris and took it everywhere I went for the next, until I could buy more books. But that was my first solid, and it's a good basic to this day. I'll look up some things in it. It starts you off considering, what house the ruler is in rather than just a quick overview. So it's really solid, juicy, but it's not easygoing.
Yeah. And that book is a brick. I mean, it is seriously huge.
It is a brick.
Yeah.
Really good first book.
One of the things I've noticed is books that get reprinted a lot have a lot of shelf space here at CAELi. So that is one of them that has almost its entire shelf in all of the printings it's gone through and the reformattings.
Interesting.
So it has stood the test of ages. And there's a fun fact about Llewellyn George. I believe he founded the first Portland School of Astrology in the early 1900s-ish before J.P. Hawthorne founded the second Portland School of Astrology about 100 years later. So that's really fun.
Yeah.
I love it.
It was juicy.
So you started when you were 11. How did that happen?
The family joke is my father is an abstract mathematician and my mother's a psychiatric nurse. Put them in a blender, you get an astrologer. I took, those stamps you could make out of potatoes.
Yeah.
And I made a calendar of the year where it was broken up by signs. So the format was a month, but the stamps were pointing out the signs so I could follow the signs. I was 11.
I love this.
And I collected myths from around the world and fairy tales and stories. And that's, I think, still to this day, a great way to begin your astrological studies and to bring in any time. More myths, more study, more views that are cross-cultural, not just European.
Mm-hmm. And do you still use those today when you're writing horoscopes?
Oh, yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to fling you out into the middle of nowhere, and you can take 3 books with you that are centering around astrology or not. What would be the books that you would bring on this trip into the unknown?
Oh, if you didn't say or not, because I would have taken a lot more. That's such a tricky question. You asked, what books would I take with me?
Yeah.
And what books most influenced me? And those are two very different things.
I'm noticing that now. Yes.
Yeah, I have a huge shelf of books that have all influenced me. I mean, shelves and shelves and shelves, like yours. And that, every one of them was precious to me. And I got bits of information about everybody. But what would I take into the future are not necessarily those books because they influenced me. I would take my 150-year ephemeris, but I take the books that are pushing me a little bit now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you get to have the ephemeris on me. That's on the house.
Okay. Got the ephemeris on the house. Good. Because that's,
that's a given.
For years, writing an article for over 30 years, I have written an article every week about the astrological weather of the week ahead through the Santa Fe, New Mexican paper and several a 3-moon calendar and other websites. And then I get to see what happens that next week. And that pattern has been the biggest educator for me.
Okay.
Because to see that every week, the feedback. So one of the strange books that I would bring, which is rather obscure, is Planets in Containment, a book by John Sandbach and Ron Ballard. And it talks about every single planet. If you're Saturn, it was Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, what planets are on either side of every planet. Because it was the first one, there's, 990 combinations in here. But it was the first one that really had pushed me to look at the pattern that, every day the lines go through that. Every month the moon circles through your chart in exactly the same pattern. And the sun hits it at those patterns. And to notice the flow as from one planet to the other around the chart and how that lives out in your early childhood, in the major, transits by progressions and by transits, and the dailiness of that. How do you perceive? What's your mythology around the entrance to and handing off of Mars, your Venus, your Jupiter? So that sense of the bigger tapestry, that was one of the first books that pushed me to look at that.
Wow.
So I would still bring that.
It's like wherever, because I'm thinking about trip charts, and so wherever you find the malefics in the trip chart on the going out or returning part of the trip, it's almost as though with the moon, just sticking with the moon, you would see, there's the pileup of malefics. That's your little tricky zone this month, or,
What happens this afternoon is you go through that, and then it gets started again. So it's always being inscribed in the same pattern in your chart as you go through those cycles.
Does it change with secondary progressions and planets changing their order?
Well, yes. And you're always still working with I look that up too. I used to look it up. Now I just, but I look at that, but it still comes off to the rhythm of your natal chart and how you're evolving it over time.
So you can't escape your natal.
You can't escape your natal, but you can evolve it.
That's awesome. Well, yeah. So are there really 990 entries in that book?
Yep.
I love it. I love it. You could also, so I was thinking about, the Sabian symbols give you 360 pieces of content when you live in the age of the algorithm. This is now 990. So I think everybody should stop. I always say stop the tape. We should stop the recording and go get this book, Planets in Containment, just so that we can start to see, like, these are 990 new ways to understand the pattern.
Right.
That's amazing.
And what it does to you as far as thinking about the pattern in your chart and the rhythm that you're seeing even in today's transits. Where does the pattern go? Where is the light, the energy pass from one planet to the other? And what is the story about that handoff?
Yeah, and it brings in this paradox of static and dynamic at the same time, because it's dynamic in showing you what passes off to what, but it's static in that your natal chart just demonstrates that pattern specifically. So that's very lovely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The relay race of our life, of our chart.
Wow. Okay.
So that's one of the books.
What would your second book be?
The two books that I'm kind of grooving on now are Postcolonial Astrology by Alice Sparkly Cat. And I wish it was even more post-colonial than it is, because they keep going back into the old story of what the European and Roman mythology. I want to hear more about what's past that. I want to hear the bigger picture, but I find it really challenging and delicious, and it really pushes the brain. What I'm interested in is books and approaches that push me a little farther than I am now, that help me see it from a different perspective, because we can't really see our perspective while we're in it. But if we can step outside it and someone can help us step outside it and look back, then we understand the water in which we swim and the lens through which we're seeing our clients and the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that useful. And just pushing myself in astrology in general, I have always appreciated Anthony Lewis, and his book on the Secrets of Predictive Astrology is one that I have on my nightstand to get into as soon as I've got some time and concentration.
Wow.
But that would be my grab it and then take it and run.
So Secrets of Predictive Astrology is very new. Tell us about this one.
It is improving the scope of your forecast using William Franklin's techniques. Anthony Lewis I just like his approach towards things. He is a physician and a psychiatrist, so he's got a good mind towards this. And this just came out in 2023. And I can't tell you too much about it because it's on my to-read list.
Okay.
But again, because it's on my to-read list, and what I've seen as I've scanned through it is intelligent and accessible, I would grab it as I ran out the door if I was heading off into the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. That's one we have yet to collect here, but I'm definitely also curious about it. Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. Let's circle back to the books that influenced you most, since we've sped through your top 3 that you'd take with you.
I would say, what books have influenced me most? I've read just about everybody, and I could say a gift and a challenge from each person. Another book that I would say was helpful to me, and, I love Liz Green and Howard Supportus, and I cut my teeth on Alan Oken, and I love Arielle Guttman's book. She's a buddy of mine. So there are many, many books. The books on evolutionary astrology are all, push you and challenge you. Myth Astrology by Raven Kaldera is also a book that pushed me. They choose a myth for every single planetary placement. Like moon in Aries is matcha, and the moon in Taurus and it's not saying that, a lot of this is channeled, but it's useful and chewy, and it's mythology from around the world, from the Congo and from Asia, and not just European, but it pushes one to think of each position of the planet in a broader way and juicier way, and gives great metaphors for talking to a client when you're trying to find a metaphor that will help them see their predicament in a more mythic and more mobile and more shamanic perspective. How do we take it from there?
Lovely. So I'm hearing this kind of, because of the channeled nature of it, I'm wondering also then, with your weekly experience of seeing what happens, how much of the planets spoken directly to you versus books speaking to you?
Huge, mostly.
Yeah.
I would say that, I've been seeing clients for 40 some years, and I have been writing this article for 30 some years. And I would say far more is out of my direct experience and case histories and the stories. That's how I started studying astrology. When I ran away from home at 15 and took my ephemeris, I looked up everybody's planets as I met them. I wrote down and just listed the planets of everybody I met for years. And then I watched them. What does that Mercury in Aries look like? What does that, and just let them teach me rather than me apply my theory onto them.
Wow.
And I could read up on it later, but watching them and watching what the 5 people I knew with Mars and Virgo had in common was what I found the most informative.
I love that. So books were a supplement to a lived experience and a direct
Yes.
experience of learning. That's so cool. So how much of your direct experience of astrology telling you what's what went into not only your deck, but the book that's coming out, or the book that you've just written?
Yes, thank you. And you asked me, what would I recommend for beginners?
Yes.
And I have to say, the book that I have that's coming out June 11th and will be out after June 11th, it's not super heavy. It's designed to give my clients to say, here is a clear entrance ramp into astrology. It will help orient you. It will help you kind of know where to put the building blocks. Then you can go read everything else and go into traditional astrology and evolutionary astrology and put them on a solid framework. And I also came with that. I made the Astro Oracle deck partly to help, so astrologers wouldn't need to worry about reading the book, though they could take my interesting perspective on what the symbols, but that when they asked a question, they pulled a Jupiter chart, they would know what it meant. Or when they pulled third house, communication, like we're doing now.
It was the first card to come up, third house.
Beautiful communication. But, and if you're asking what the problem is, and it says communication, like you're not communicating enough, let's go deal with that.
Or what the problem is, third house, oh, it's your sister.
Yeah.
But the back of the cards are also gorgeous because they're double-sided, so you can rotate it in any direction, and you won't know whether it's right side up or upside down.
That's the whole point on that.
Amazing.
I have a giant tattoo on my arm now from the cover of this.
Oh,
I love
that.
It. So I worked with a tattoo artist in Australia who is from Brazil to do the work because I think so much astrological art is too pastel. So
now
I wanted something with more punch.
You can have about how many cards are in your deck? 54 or
56?
56 tattoos.
Yeah,
here,
I'm working my way there slowly. No. But why I built them was, again, astrologers wouldn't need to necessarily look them up. But, what I hear from most people that are daunted and they said, oh, I'd love to study astrology, but there's just so many terms, I can't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so, take it one term at a time. Pull a card a day and look it up and read it, what I had to say about it, read it in your astrology book, kind of just begin. And as you use them for an oracle deck, you will begin to find all of astrology more accessible.
Well, and you've also had this translated now into how many languages?
11.
That's so awesome.
It's so exciting. I think French is just coming out. I just got a question from somebody in Colombia for the Spanish version. It's in Polish and Hungarian. Why not? They show an interest and then they ask. And it's Chinese and Japanese were the more recent ones. So I'm very excited.
Very exciting. And I love how you led with the deck first. And now I was surprised. I was asking you to come on the show and I didn't even think about that you've turned the deck into a book. Usually I think it's the other way around, right?
Right.
Very cool. Very cool. So are there any other books you would suggest for a beginner?
The Inner Sky, A to Z Horoscope Delineator.
Yeah, that's a not common one. Although I think back in the day.
Yes, back in the day.
The A to Z Horoscope Delineator was a major textbook for people, a major textbook. And then it kind of fell out of favor, I think, because other things became more attractive with graphic design and such.
And it's a little dense to start with, and it is old school and it teaches you how to make a chart and things that most of us don't necessarily think they need at the beginning.
Well, back in the day, they didn't have computers.
Yeah. So you had to do the chart.
When he wrote it 100 years ago, I mean, that was 100 years ago and there's no computers then. So you had to know how to do that math.
Exactly. And I think every astrologer should know how to do the math because then you understand the structure of a chart in a different way. You may never use it again. Believe me, I don't. But it helps you recognize when the chart is off, when the timing is off, and to know the structure of the chart from the inside out. I think it's important for everybody to do.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the building blocks of early education. You learn all of these nuts and bolts of how to know what we know, and then you move on to your favorite things, and you don't ever really have to revisit those things, but at least you know where they are.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. So, well, anything else we want to cover before we speed off into the sunset here?
Into the sunset here. Just thank you for this opportunity and for keeping such a wonderful repository in your library behind you, because it is so good to see it coming up and to see the exciting new conversations in astrology. I'm very excited about it.
There's a lot to uncover too, and all of it. There's, what I'm noticing actually sitting here is more the things like the A to Z horoscope delineator and other 20th century texts that came out that have been overshadowed by the obsession with the traditional revival. And I'm appreciating how creative people were in the 1920s through 1980s and even into the early 90s before Project Hindsight really took root, because there's a lot of fantastic weirdness in there and just
a lot of fantastic weirdness,
ways to think about this stuff that just,
Right. And this is a point, not a point of contention, but, if you look back at the history of astrology, past way hundreds of years past, and when we look at traditional astrology, we're looking past, but we're not necessarily looking at the evolution of astrology. Every bit of that works. Every bit of that counts. Every bit of that adds. So instead of replacing some of the more, the last 200 years, we're adding on, we're re-exposing ourselves to and incorporating traditional astrology. I don't think you can take it apart. And when I see people go, no, I'm right, you're not, then I'm also an interfaith minister, and I see that in spirituality and religion all the time. I'm right, you're not, because when I go my method, it works for me, and I have this connection to the infinite. Therefore, yours must not work. I'm right because it works for me. That doesn't mean you're not. So that's
correct.
In any of these, that just keep opening up. Like, what does that person have to offer from their perspective, rather than right or wrong?
Well, and it's also not necessarily on the human using it too. It's actually maybe astrology showing us a very interesting side of itself, facing what we were coming up with in the 20th century.
Absolutely.
So it's like people are saying, this is the real astrology, and then 20th century astrology, kind of mid-century astrology, is going, hey, wait a minute, I'm trying to be creative here.
Right. And I'm incorporating it in what we've come to understand in human psyche.
Yeah.
What I am interested in, and all of my stuff is about choice-based astrology, that any astrology that says you're stuck in this path is of no interest to me. I am interested in saying, here is the flowering of this symbol. You're stuck in this corner of it. How can we help you use the other side of that aspect to help improve your life? Where is the remedy? Where's the cure? Where's the path? Where's the lesson that opens this up rather than leaves you stuck? So any astrology that does that, not this, I'm for.
Right. And I think there's also deep inside the human engagement with the celestial factors is always that idea of talking back. I mean, we're sassy. Human beings are sassy. We talk back all the time. We never didn't. And I think the skeptics see it from the outside going, oh, it's so fated. That's so deterministic. Like, how dare you tell me I'm always going to be an ornery old guy? And it's like, well, you don't have to be.
Certainly manifesting it now,
You could become an astrologer. And then no, but there is that, like, always this idea of talking back with the gods,
right,
or the myths, and trying to figure it out. But the thing is, here's my question for you about that. The myths recur, though. Gilgamesh is always going to be trying to seek immortality and failing, and it will recur, this repetition. What do you think about that repetition?
Tell me more about which repetition are you referring?
Any myth. It has a beginning, there's a challenge, there's a progression, there's a sort of encounter challenge, and then there's a resolution of some type. But then you enter the myth and it starts all back over again, just like the year. We're always going around the sun.
Yeah, we're spiraling. Yeah. And there's so many iterations of the same pattern. Yeah. You can see it. I think of Arnold Mindell in process-oriented psychotherapy. We talked about how he first discovered it in the psyche of the body when he was doing dream body experiences. Then they would get somebody who was out of severe health crisis or coma doing this work, during the Jungian intense psychotherapy. Then they'd send them home and they'd get sick all over again. So they began to take that same pattern and approach relationships with it. Then they, got them better again. And then they went back to work and they got sick again. Every time they took a step out, they had to learn that healing pattern in a new and larger circumstance. And I think of that in astrology, that we hit those cycles over and over again. And it's always a chance to take the learning that we've got and expand it and incorporate it in a new environment.
Amazing. So where can people find you?
RowanRobbins.com. or you can just Google Starcodes and you will find me.
Amazing. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Oh, so glad to. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at CAELi.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.